Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up, because tonight's rabbit hole doesn't just go deep, it goes full-on Mariana Trench. You ever read an official report and think, wait, did a toddler with safety scissors edit this? Yeah, that's exactly the vibe the FBI just served us on a silver platter. So here's the so-called truth. Charlie Kirk, silenced in broad daylight, case closed. FBI waves around an autopsy report like it's the 10 Commandments, expecting us to bow down and say, "Yes, Bureau Daddy, we believe you." But Candace Owens? Oh, she's not just raising an eyebrow. She's flipping the entire table and asking the question none of the talking heads on CNN dare whisper. If the timestamps don't match, what else doesn't? Think about it. Missing texts, cameras mysteriously unplugged, two guys moving chairs like it's a stage rehearsal for a Broadway show, and the FBI still tells us, nothing to see here, folks. Really? Really? And let's not even start on the leaked footage TMZ just happened to stumble across. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just a coincidence. So tonight we're asking the question, is this incompetence or is this the greatest cover-up since Epstein's nap time? So let's set the stage, because this entire scandal does not look like a small crack. In the system, it looks like a sinkhole swallowing. Every ounce of credibility the FBI has left, and taking with it anyone foolish enough to still believe their bedtime stories. At the heart of it is Charlie Kirk, whose death the Bureau rushed to wrap up faster than you can say case closed, and Candace Owens, who has now positioned herself as the accidental detective, the woman who refuses to play along with the official bedtime story. Now the Bureau wants us to believe this is open and shut. They wave an autopsy report like it is holy scripture and expect everyone to nod and move on. But Candace did not nod. She leaned in, she squinted at the fine print, and she found that the so-called smoking gun was more like a toy pistol missing half the parts. Think about it. We are told there are text messages from the alleged shooter Tyler Robinson that reveal his motive, but when you actually look at the texts, something is off. Timestamps are missing. Entire conversations just vanish. One moment he is ranting about nothing, the next moment it jumps hours ahead like someone hit skip forward on a bad podcast. If this is the Bureau's version of evidence, then it is the sloppiest forgery since a kid wrote his mom's signature with a crayon. Candace seized on that and asked the obvious question. If the FBI cannot present a clean text thread, how are we supposed to trust their story of why Kirk was killed in the first place? And once she said it, the crowd online exploded because everybody knows what it looks like when a chat is doctored. We have all seen friends cut and paste messages to hide the embarrassing bits. But this is not high school drama. This is supposed to be the nation's top investigative body. Then there is the camera footage. Or should we say the missing camera footage? Witnesses recall two unidentified men inside the building the night Kirk was shot. They were not just loitering around, they were moving his chair. They were yanking out an SD card from the security system as calmly as if they were changing batteries in a remote control. If this really happened, how is it that the FBI never even mentioned it in their reports? How is it that the video vanished into thin air as if David Copperfield was running evidence collection? Candace dubbed it Cameragate, and that phrase spread like wildfire online. Suddenly, every meme account was posting about FBI janitors deleting files, and every skeptic had a reason to side-eye the official timeline. But it does not stop there. Enter George Zinn, the 71-year-old man who randomly confessed in front of cameras claiming he was the one who shot Charlie. He was arrested, dragged away as his pants slipped down, which gave the media their circus clip of the week. Later, it turned out he had nothing to do with it. He admitted he made a false confession just to draw attention away from the real shooter, and yet the FBI let the story hang in the air long enough to muddy the waters. Was it a mistake or was it deliberate confusion? Because letting the public feast on a fake confession while ignoring glaring inconsistencies in your own files looks less like incompetence and more like theater. And let's not forget the governor. At his press conference, he contradicted himself about what the suspect was wearing on the night of the shooting. First it was one outfit, then it was another. Candace pointed out that this was not some minor slip of the tongue. If they cannot get the clothing right, how can we trust their entire identification process? If the suspect's shirt changes colors depending on the press conference, maybe the rest of the case is color changing too. Add to this the ballistics that do not line up. The FBI at one point said they were still searching for a bullet, yet the autopsy report presented wounds that did not match the official story. One wound allegedly did not even bleed the way it should have. That means either the bullet never existed or the story was adjusted after the fact. Either way, the narrative looks patched together with duct tape. When you stack all these pieces side by side, you begin to see what Candace sees. This is not just a series of mistakes. It is a playbook. False confessions pushed in front of cameras, governors contradicting themselves, evidence disappearing, timestamps edited like a bad movie, and all the while the FBI saying, "Trust us, we are professionals." But people are not buying it because in post-Epstein America, nobody trusts an agency that asks for blind faith. Every contradiction is a red flag, every missing file a neon sign blinking cover-up. And that is why this case is spiraling into something much bigger than one tragedy. The autopsy that was supposed to close the book has instead ripped it wide open, and as if the pile of inconsistencies was not enough, the plot thickened with whispers about an engineering firm tucked quietly in the background, Calira Engineering, a company that on paper only makes valves and pipes, but when Candace dug a little deeper, the breadcrumbs started to look like a trail leading into the defense industry and beyond. Neighbors living right next to people tied to the suspect just happened to be employed at Calira, which itself just happened to hold contracts that overlap with defense and intelligence projects. Now, maybe to the average viewer this sounds like a coincidence, but coincidences have a funny way of multiplying whenever the FBI is involved. 3 different people Candace had investigated, in totally unrelated scandals, turned out to have backgrounds in the same very niche valve and piping industry, and she started to ask the question that others were too polite or too afraid to even whisper, could this be another front? Company, another convenient cover for activities no one is supposed to trace. She drew parallels to past cases Fred Hampton officially killed in a raid, justified by evidence that later collapsed into a documented FBI plot, or Jeffrey Epstein, whose autopsy contained details more consistent with strangulation than with suicide, yet the Bureau wanted everyone to swallow the simple story. These were not random references, they were deliberate comparisons designed to remind the audience that official autopsies can and have been used as props in bigger narratives, protecting the powerful while silencing dissent. The FBI, of course, tried to push back, saying the autopsy was proof the case was solved, but that only raised more suspicion. If your foundation evidence is already surrounded by broken timestamps, missing footage, and vanishing witnesses, then repeating the word autopsy like a magical chant does not rebuild trust, it deepens doubt. And the public picked up on that fast. On social media, screenshots of the timestamp gaps were shared like wildfire side by side with Candace's viral clips where she described Cameragate. The debate grew brutal. One side called her reckless, accused her of profiting off tragedy of chasing clout, but the other side crowned her as the only one willing to say the quiet part out loud. And in the middle of this digital battlefield, the FBI's credibility bled out day by day. Because when your narrative only survives if the audience believes you, and then the audience starts seeing receipts of your inconsistencies, you no longer have a narrative. You have a meme. Have a narrative. You have a meme. Meanwhile, more oddities surfaced. Leaked whispers claimed that certain Bureau officials had enjoyed lavish dinners funded by donors linked to industries that profited from the chaos of stricter speech laws and public unrest. Anonymous sources painted images of steak dinners with $600 wine bottles while agents casually discussed case updates. Whether every detail was true or not, the image was enough to sour public opinion. Add to that rumors of expensive surveillance equipment suddenly appearing on expense reports, and you get a picture of a Bureau more interested in optics and perks than in presenting clean evidence. People began to joke that the FBI was not Federal Bureau of Investigation but Federal Bureau of Improvisation, because the way the case narrative kept changing looked like a script being rewritten on the fly. Candace capitalized on every twist. In one broadcast, she hammered the point that the Bureau has a history of sealing files, too fast wrapping cases in shiny red tape, and daring anyone to question the contents. She reminded her viewers of scandals where the Bureau's story collapsed years later, and she positioned the Kirk case as the next inevitable chapter in that same book. Her voice rose as she declared that what the FBI calls closure, the public should call cover-up. And the timing of all of this could not have been worse for the Bureau, because public trust in institutions is already cracked. Post-pandemic, post-Epstein, post-countless leaks, people have learned to expect manipulation. The FBI telling them to stop asking questions was like pouring gasoline on a fire. The scandal became more than a murder case, it became a cultural touchstone. Memes compared the missing timestamps to Netflix buffering, and jokes about the vanishing SD card trended on Twitter. Yet underneath the humor was real fear. Because if evidence can be erased this easily, if narratives can be bent this smoothly, then no one feels safe trusting official stories again. Governors tripping over their own words became late-night punchlines, yet each contradiction reminded viewers that even the most basic facts, like what shirt a suspect was wearing, could be unstable when filtered through official channels. The autopsy, which was supposed to close the book, was now treated like another suspicious artifact, another puzzle piece that might have been edited before release. And as the days stretched on, the pressure grew. Whispers about congressional probes began to leak. Talk of potential resignations among FBI leadership circled through political blogs. Financial questions popped up too, because once the narrative cracked, people started to dig not just into the case, but into the Bureau's spending habits and connections. Suddenly, this was not only about Charlie Kirk, it was about the entire credibility of federal law enforcement standing trial in the court of public opinion. The atmosphere was charged with the feeling that something big was coming, and nobody wanted to be the one caught on the wrong side of history. By the time the storm reached its peak, the fallout was impossible to contain because every day brought a new contradiction or leak that pushed the Bureau further into the corner and turned public curiosity into public outrage. The first ripple was the talk of resignations, and that alone was enough to make cable news spin into frenzy, but then came whispers of sealed depositions and frantic late-night meetings inside federal offices, where senior officials argued about whether to double down on the autopsy narrative or quietly admit errors in evidence handling. Neither option was safe. To confess mistakes would validate Candace and her army of online investigators, but to stay silent meant fueling even bigger conspiracy theories that painted the FBI as a willing participant in orchestrating a cover-up. And the public did not wait for official answers, they built their own. Threads on forums mapped out connections between Calira Engineering and shadowy defense contractors, with charts that looked like crime board collages from detective shows, red lines linking names, dates, and contracts. Even if half the details were speculation, the sheer volume of content circulating made the official story look thin like tissue paper. Then the financial angle caught fire, because leaked expense sheets hinted at millions allocated to obscure projects during the same quarter as the Kirk investigation. The timing raised suspicion that resources were being funneled away to bury or manage fallout, rather than to solve the crime itself. Critics shouted that this was taxpayer money funding bureaucratic stagecraft, not justice. Candace seized that angle and framed it as proof that the system was less about solving murders and more about maintaining illusions of control. Her delivery was sharp. She said, "Look at the receipts, literally, look at where your money goes: $600 dinners, six-figure surveillance, toys, while families of victims are told there is no budget for extended investigations." That line echoed across clips on TikTok and Twitter, spreading faster than any official statement the Bureau could release. Public backlash spilled into the streets, with protests staged outside FBI field offices and state capitals, people holding signs that read, "Where is the footage?" and "Stop the cover-up." Some wore masks with Charlie Kirk's face. Others carried cardboard cutouts of SD cards dangling from nooses. It was theater, but it was also raw anger. News crews filmed crowds chanting questions about who profits from silence and who benefits from confusion. Politicians began to sniff opportunity, lining up to demand hearings, some genuinely motivated, others eager to ride the wave of outrage into campaign sound bites. For the Bureau, it meant scrutiny on every level and no safe exit route. And just when it seemed the Bureau might ride the storm out, came another leak, a supposed draft of an internal memo suggesting agents were instructed to withhold evidence until the narrative was stabilized. The wording was vague, but damning enough to suggest intentional delay and manipulation. It was exactly the kind of fuel the fire needed. Candace read excerpts on air, her tone dripping with sarcasm as she asked stabilization of what, the truth or the story. That clip alone racked up millions of views in hours. By then, even skeptics who once dismissed her as sensational started to admit that the sheer volume of anomalies demanded answers. The Bureau's silence sounded louder than any denial, speculation about legal consequences grew as congressional committees signaled they were preparing subpoenas, and watchdog groups filed lawsuits demanding the release of unredacted reports. Talk of budget cuts circled as lawmakers threatened to strip funding until transparency was restored. It felt less like a scandal contained to one tragic death, and more like the opening of Pandora's box, where every ghost of the Bureau's past missteps came rushing back to haunt them. Epstein, Fred Hampton, COINTELPRO, all the old wounds were reopened in online debates, and now they were tied directly to Charlie Kirk's case-like chapters in the same cursed book. The final stretch, the Bureau looked less like the hunter and more like the hunted, cornered by public skepticism, political opportunism, and relentless voices like Candace who refuse to let the story die. And that is where the tension rests, because when institutions lose control of the narrative, they also lose the shield that protects them from deeper accountability. The FBI had tried to close the book, but instead they ignited a movement where every missing frame of video and every contradictory statement became evidence not of sloppy work, but of something darker, something designed. Whether or not the full truth ever comes out, one thing is certain. The public is no longer waiting for permission to question power. They are already doing it with a fury that shows no signs of slowing. So here we are standing at the edge of a story that was never supposed to see daylight, and the only question left is, what will you do with it? Because scandals like this only survive when people shrug and scroll away, but when you demand answers, when you refuse to be silenced, the walls begin to crack, and the truth starts leaking through. They counted on you being too distracted, too tired, too trusting, but now you know what the files say, what the footage hides, what the contradictions scream. Do you believe the official bedtime story, or do you believe your own eyes and ears? The choice is yours, but let me remind you that silence is complicity and apathy is the oxygen of cover-ups. If you want this story to keep shaking the walls of power, then you have to amplify it, share it, question it, and never let it fade into the background. Drop your thoughts below, because your comments are not just chatter. They are a record of resistance. Hit that like button if you refuse to swallow scripted lies, and subscribe, because this is just the beginning and the next revelation might be even darker. Revelation might be even darker.